Students, please keep your microphones muted during the lecture.
We are live now.
Okay, so I begin.
Yes, sir. Let's begin.
Okay, so because yesterday's lecture was a bit rushed, it's a good idea to briefly recapitulate what we said because of the great importance of this topic. So yesterday we began with the need. Basically, we want to have a clear postulatory framework of quantum mechanics. That's what we did. And the postulate 2 is that the state itself has complete information. And postulate 1 is to each physical observer is associated a linear Hermitian operator. You know what one means by linear. And this is the definition of, some people were asking, what is the meaning of A dagger? The answer is, it is just this. Please do not take a standalone operator and try to see what dagger means. Operator dagger is defined this way and no other way. And of course, if A is A dagger, it is Hermitian. So, and then we saw these various common observables. Parity operator, once again, an operator is defined by what it does. That's all. So there's nothing more to parity operator than this, etc. Intrinsic spin operator, and we saw some operators, and then we gave proofs, etc. And properties. I think all of you know those 3 properties, so I don't need to revise that at all. And the degeneracy situation, all of you seem to be now familiar. The 3 important properties, and the degenerate situation. This is the orthonormality property, and then we also saw the completeness properties. And this thing I had asked you to do it yourself, so it will give you good practice to invert these expressions by multiplying this by E star ns, taking care of dummy variables, etc. And all that will come through practice. No amount of explanation is enough for that. So these are the completeness property we have long said is difficult to prove, and we take it from mathematics. And postulate 2 was very important. No matter what the state is, you will get on measurement of A, you will get only its eigenvalues and nothing else. So that was postulate 2. And this may, when the eigenvalues are quantized, this immediately gives you the great feature of quantum mechanics that certain observables are quantized. You never see their values in between. So this postulate is formalizing that point. And these are the various operators. Some of them have discrete values, some continuous, some situations have both, spectrum, etc. And position operators, I'll not go into everything. You just should remember that it is an delta function at that point, and the eigenvalue equation. You should just see the eigenvalue equation, and then they satisfy. Just a matter of practice, and it will be all very clear. Momentum operator, this is the operator, this is the eigenfunction, this is the eigenvalue, etc. And there are some questions of normalization. So this is a delta function normalization. So you get on the right side delta, and then if one is worried about the problem of square integrability, then this is a trick to make periodic box is a trick. And at the end of the calculation, L should be made to go to 0. So it is just an intermediate trick that is done. And then you get Kronecker delta for periodic box. The orthonorm, instead of getting delta, delta function, you get Kronecker delta, which is an easier version of this. Okay, and postulate 3 was most important, and I had to hurry through. So let's see it again. So this is a postulate, the central postulate. It is saying, answering the question that we asked right in the beginning, what information does it contain? What probabilistic information? The answer is, if you want about A, first solve the equation separately and find both eigenvalues and eigenfunctions. And then the interpretation is very clear that if this is more, then this side is likely to be more in that En. And in En, the idea is the operator will give you An. So the interpretation is very natural, Cn mod square, because these are all complex. So you have to take their mod square. This is the probability that measurement will give you An. And exactly the same thing. This is a general postulate. You do the same thing for B. In that case, you find the eigenfunctions of B, not A, and expand this. Any operator, its eigenfunctions form a complete set. So it is always possible. And therein, the answer is complete. How to determine the probability distribution of any observable in quantum mechanics in terms in a given state psi of RT at a given instant. So as psi evolves in time, these quantities will change in general. So that completes the questions we asked, answers to the questions we asked in the thing. And degeneracy is a minor complication. And as I told you, it is because you are measuring An, but you get CNS, so you take its mod square and sum over S, so that will give you the. Now this measurement I had rushed through, so maybe we did not get idea. It's a very complicated topic, and it is not my aim to do it in any detail, but still some things you should know. So the way to look at in quantum mechanics all this thing is, please remember the most important point of modern quantum, Copenhagen interpretation of Niels Bohr, that psi represents a particle. Psi does not represent ensemble, but to see the operational meaning of probabilities, like in any probability experiment, you take ensemble of identical trials, so identical quantum systems. So there are millions of experimenters who have prepared identical quantum state, and quantum state is completely described by wave function, zeroth postulate. So we can prepare each one of them prepared. And so, as postulate 2 says, when each one of them is experimenters do the experiment, then she has got to report one of the eigenvalues of this. One postulate 2 says no experimenter in those millions of will report any value except the set of discrete or whatever they are values of the eigenvalues of that measure operator which you are measuring. And the postulate 3 has told you with what probability they will come. You remember Cn mod square? So those are the probabilities. So some experimenters will report some will report some. You put together all those values, and as usual, when you have such data, you find out the probability distributions. Okay. Just divide by the total number. How many people have got, and divide by the total number, you find out this. So this is the operational meaning of all that we are saying. So probability distribution is a final thing for any probabilistic theory. From that, you can get mean value, that is expectation value, variance, uncertainty, etc. All information is contained in the probability distribution. Okay. Now, there are some issues. The issue is this, that First of all, what is the meaning of measurement? We have been saying measurement without actually saying. So what does measurement constitute? So this is where the issues of interpretative issues start becoming difficult and not yet settled properly. But according to Niels Bohr's and his colleagues' interpretation, called the Copenhagen interpretation, when you measure something, even if the atomic system may be, but you measure an electron on a screen. So that screen or whatever by a counter, whatever, that always is a classical apparatus. So measurement involves interaction, and the classical apparatus gives you a definite value. So that is what they said. And for an observer, say, being measured in the state at some time, suppose some member of that millions of people who are doing the experiment with the same size, some member has reported lambda 3. What does it mean? For that member, after the measurement, the state will be in E3. So just prior to, so look at now the difficult situation, which is the problem of measurement. Just prior to the measurement, the system is in psi for every member. But for this particular member who measured lambda 3, its state immediately after the measurement is E3. In fact, if she does an experiment again immediately, so immediately that there is no time for the state to evolve, she is going to report again lambda 3. That particular member, that particular experimenter, remember, not somebody else. If measurement has been lambda 3 in the beginning, and immediately you measure it, it is going to be lambda 3 again, because you have not let the system evolve. So what has happened? If just prior to measurement is psi, after measurement is E3, which equation governs this? This is called wave function collapse, because it's suddenly collapsing. And the Copenhagen interpretation says we do not know what happens, and quantum mechanics has no evolution equation for this sudden collapse. This is, you just have to take it, that is what it is. That was the interpretation. Many people remain unsatisfied, but that's how it was in Copenhagen interpretation. They said, well, we know very well how it is coming before the measurement, how it is evolving by time-dependent Schrödinger equation, how after the measurement, if you leave it alone, it will again evolve by Schrödinger equation. So that is all perfect, absolutely understood. But there is no equation in quantum mechanics that tells you how this evolved wave function collapse takes place. They said it's basically their policy was that this is beyond quantum mechanics and we should not worry about it. So that was this. But of course, everybody did not agree with them. So people wanted to wave function collapse, and there are many thinkers who have proposed various things which we need not go into. So wave function, at least in the current Copenhagen interpretation, remains unexplained. Again, unsatisfying feature is the Niels Bohr's bringing in classical system to interpret quantum mechanics, that the measurement involves interaction with the classical apparatus. It is somewhat unsatisfactory. Also, another important point was it was not a clear-cut thing where quantum mechanics starts and up to what classical mechanics. The dividing line is not clear even now, but I mean, it has been there. A related question is that this measurement interaction, is it something of the entirely different kind than the usual interactions of quantum system? That once again is not very clearly explained. Another very important point is that, well, macroscopic object after all consists of atoms and molecules, and now atoms and molecules are they satisfy quantum mechanics, and you very happily talk of the superpositions of atomic states. We have been talking of this superposition all the time. Then if the body, macroscopic body consists of these, they can be in superposition. Why can't their whole collection, macroscopic collection, also be in superpositions? So people wanted to explain why this superpositions, because superpositions of macroscopic states is just not seen. As I gave you the example, a chair A at one position and chair at another position. So you don't have this superposition that 50% of the time it is at one position or and 50 at another. You find it always at a definite position. And this is problematic from the point of view of quantum mechanics, because electrons, you can have superpositions where it is 50% of the time at one position and 50% of the time at another position. All kinds of superposition, energy is momentum. So why can't it be for network? So this is a problem, but however, in this particular problem, there is considerable progress, and that is called decoherence. Basically, the idea is there's a constant environmental interaction, and that those superpositions exist, but they decohere so fast that you can't see that. That is one idea. And so these are various issues, and there are large number of interpretations existing in the literature. If this subject fascinates you, please go to the literature and consult experts. This subject is called Foundations in Quantum Theory, and a lot of people both in India and abroad are very involved in it. But I must warn you that it's a difficult subject, and before you start doing something, you first have to master one interpretation, the standard quantum mechanics and all its mathematical formalism, etc. Without mastering that and getting into these deeper fields is not a good idea. So those who are getting into this, they have already mastered. They have great experts in quantum mechanics already, and then they debate these issues and so on. So far, there has not been coming, and it's a very active field of research. Okay, so that is what I have spent some time revising it. So I hope you have got a better idea now. Now, this topic of commuting operators is of great practical importance and also conceptual importance. And some of it you know already. Suppose two linear Hermitian operators A and B have a complete common eigenfunctions. You are given that they have a common. Common means sometimes people use the word simultaneous, but you can use common or simultaneous, one and the same thing. So A and B, you have this common eigenfunctions. Then it is obvious that in general you will need two indices A, M, N. But the eigenvalue of A is denoted by AM, and eigenvalue of B operator is denoted by Bn. They may be, our notation is discrete, that's always a bit convenient. So you write AB, EMN, it's obviously going to be BA. Why? Because these are ordinary numbers, real numbers. These are Hermitian operators, they are numbers. So B this, now you operate on A, it will give you A, run through this Bn, it will operate on AE, which will give AM. And if you do BA, it will give you first AM and then BN, but these numbers commute. So therefore, this is obviously true. Then this is equal to this. If they have common eigenfunctions, AB on that function is the same thing as BN, because ordinary numbers commute. And since these form a complete set, on any arbitrary function, therefore, they will be the same thing. So this is the proof that if somebody tells you that there is a complete, mark the word complete and common eigenfunction set of two operators, then it is AB on any psi is the same thing as BA on any psi. And this is the meaning of equality of operators. Two operators are equal, not when they just operate on one particular function, their effect is equal. No. And any arbitrary function, if their effect is identical, then they are equal operators. So we have come to the conclusion that a complete common eigenset necessarily implies that the two operators commute. Commute means AB equal to BA. So that is the meaning of this. What about the converse? Supposing you are given that two linear Hermitian operators A and B commute, then it is always possible to get. So it's the converse theorem. Last stage was that somebody has given you complete set and you are you easily prove that they commute. Here it is, we know they commute. Can we always get, is the converse of the theorem true? The answer is yes. But please note the theorem statement very, very carefully. And there is this a big pitfall that many people could have if they're not careful. It is not saying that for two commuting operators, every eigenfunction of A is necessarily an eigenfunction. No. It only says it is always possible to construct such a. And this is how all has to do with degeneracy, as you can see. Supposing we solve the eigenvalue problem of A and we find this. Okay. Now look at the important result. I operate that eigenvalue equation by B. Okay. Since AB commute, that is AB is equal to B, I am given that I can switch the order on A and put this. What does this equation show? That if chi-m was this eigenfunction of A with eigenvalue m, so is B into chi-m. So B into chi-m, which is some function, is also an eigenfunction of A with the same eigenvalue. Very, very important. Now, if the eigenvalue of Am is non-degenerate, it can happen. For example, lowest state of hydrogen atom is equal to 0 without spin is non-degenerate. It can happen sometimes. Generally, it will not happen, but eigenvalue of Am is non-degenerate. Then, of course, it is clear that by the meaning of non-degeneracy that B chi-m has to be multiple of chi-m. Is it not? Because we had said when something is non-degenerate, there is only one linearly independent eigenfunction. And we have already said it is chi-m. So B chi-m has to be that only, 2 within a multiple. So therefore, B chi-m should be a multiple. But this is a rare situation. If Am is degenerate, then what about this B chi-m? It need not be a multiple of chi-m. Because Am is degenerate means there are many functions. So it is possible that this B chi-m belongs to one of those other functions. You see, chi-m is not the only eigenfunction of Am if Am is degenerate. There are some p number of eigenfunctions. So therefore, if Am is p, it will generally be some other function. You forget the word vector space. It will be some other combination of those degenerate eigenfunctions. So that is the point. This B operator could take it. Now, according to linear vector, which I'm going to do just next 5-10 minutes, it is always possible to find, supposing that Am is p-fold degenerate, it is always possible to find p eigenfunction of B in this p-dimensional space. So that you will come to it in the next lecture. So just take it as a result that B chi-m need not necessarily be chi-m, but it will be in one of those degenerate eigenfunctions of Am. And you can always find such a combination that particular combination is an eigenfunction of A as well as an eigenfunction of phi. So that proves that when operators commute, a complete set of common eigenfunctions. This needs the result from linear vector spaces theory that it is always possible to find p eigenfunctions of B in this p-dimensional space. So you think about it, it's a little more complicated than the simpler non-degenerate case. So the case of an operator commuting with Hamiltonian is particularly important. So far my discussion was for any two operators. But if one operator commutes with H, then it has great physical significance. This usually arises due to some symmetry of the Hamiltonian. When the Hamiltonian is symmetric, then it will often happen. For example, rotational symmetry of a particle, you will see, we are going to prove this, in a spherically symmetric potential leads to orbital angular momentum equal to 0. The commutator, L commutes with H. And as seen before, this for commuting operator, this will likely mean degeneracy in energy. Because, generally, if there are two commuters, then generally, except for special cases, generally you will need two indices for their common eigenfunctions. The moment you need two indices, that means one index is not enough, and therefore there are many functions for this. Another consequence of 8 is that the expectation value A does not change with time. So this has very profound significance when an operator commutes with H. First of all, you can be more or less sure, except as a special case, that the Hamiltonian energy is going to have degeneracy. And this is what happens most of the time in atoms. The Hamiltonian have some symmetry, and therefore their energies are usually degenerate. And another important point is about the time, with respect to time, because remember, Schrodinger equation gives H the role of time, H psi is equal to IH cross del by delta T psi. So H is not like any other operator. H has a very profound role in the time evolution of the system. And therefore, that using Schrodinger equation, you can show that another consequence of AH being zero, another consequence of AH being zero, I should say, is that the expectation value of A does not change with time. So, and finally, you see, you may say, where do you stop? So in generally, a system will have a maximum set of commuting operators that we say complete. This complete is very different from complete set of eigenfunction, although we are using the same word. I would rather say maximum, the set of maximum commuting operators. Then what will happen? Then wave function will be described by eigenvalues of A1, A2, up to AP, and no more. So if you describe the wave function for each of the eigenvalues by each index required for these operators, then it is unique. Then there is no other operator. So therefore, if you want to, what it means is, if you want to prepare a system completely uniquely, we talked about preparing the system uniquely. What is the procedure in quantum mechanics? You should simultaneously find out all the possible commuting operators which are there in for that particular situation, and then these eigenvalues will completely specify the wave function. Of course, always completely to within a phase for normalized. So a system can be prepared in such a state by performing a simultaneous measurement of a complete set of commuting observables. So that is so then the commutator of two operators AB is notation is this: AB is equal to 0. You can find out the commutators of this R and P. Please do this yourself by using the fact that QI will be 0, PI PJ will be 0. QI PJ will be where Q stands for XYZ, PJ stands for PX PY PZ. So what does it mean? QX PX will be IH cross, because then the Kronecker delta is 1, and QX PY will be 0. So please remember these commutators. They are the fundamental commutators of quantum mechanics. The way to prove it is you go to coordinate space, take Q as X, P is minus IH cross del by del X, operate it on wave function. Whenever you have to do anything about operators, if you are saying some operator is equal to this, the only way is operate it on a arbitrary wave function and show the left hand side is equal to the right hand side. Don't just look at the operators and try to see if they are equal or not equal. You operate them on an arbitrary wave function, and if for an arbitrary function, the operator A on the left hand side, this operator on psi is IH cross on psi, then you say that QI PJ is IH cross. So that is the way you have to do. So these operators are very, very fundamental. We are going to use them. Then it follows that QI of any function of P will be 0, and PI any function of P, PI and F, where F is a function of Q. So PI will be minus H cross by del X. All these need proofs. So these are long things, and our lectures are not too many. So several things are being left to you, and you must prove them yourself. Please prove at home this thing, and do not just write this and just say, well, PI is minus IH cross del by del QI operating on here. No, that's not a way of proving it. What is the way of proving it? Put a psi here. put a psi here and show that this is equal to this onto any psi, and do not, and psi should be any function, not any particular function. Psi should be any function. Then if you find the left-hand side on that function is the right-hand side, then you have proved this commutator. So whenever you do commutator problems, take it as a tip. You have to operate it on function and see what they do. And similarly, some simple identities involving commutators, they are very simple. Almost orally you can do them. A, B is minus BA. These are the, sometimes you need A, B, C. For example, if you want x px square, x and px square. So you know only x px. So how will you do x px square? You have to use such identities. And the last one is very nice, cyclic sort of ABC, BCA, CAB. This is called Jacobi identity and very useful often. So this I have already done it. So I'll quickly go to, I already acknowledged last lectures. So
Sir, this
Yeah.
is Kolahal. Can we take a few questions
yeah,
here?
yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first question is,
Yeah.
I guess this is related to the chi-m that you had introduced.
Yeah.
So chi-m is only an eigenfunction belonging to the common set of eigenfunctions of A and B, right?
Achha, I have to go to this. That's right. Which slide are we talking about?
I guess it should be around 34.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Chi was,
34.
no, before that. I'll come to that. Yeah. What is the question?
Chi-m is only an eigenfunction belonging to the common set of eigenfunctions of A and B, right?
No. Chi-m need not be an eigenfunction of B. That is the point. Chi-m need not be an eigenfunction of B. But if AM is degenerate, it will not, it won't be only chi-m. There are many others. There are chi-m1 up to chi-m-p. If AM is p-fold degenerate, then there are many other functions. Chi-m is only one. So chi-m need not be eigenfunction of B. That's the whole point. Next slide, see. B chi-m. B chi-m is an eigenfunction of A, but chi-m is not an eigenfunction of A. I mean, it could be by coincidence, but B chi-m in general, chi-m will in general not B chi-m. But what will be B chi-m? B chi-m, because it is degenerate, it is p-fold degenerate, AM is p. B chi-m will be one of those or their linear combinations of the p number of eigenfunctions of AM. You see the point? AM is degenerate, p-fold degenerate. That means it doesn't only chi-m. It has chi-m1, chi-m1 could give an index up, chi-m1, chi-m2, chi-m3, and any linear combination of them is also an eigenfunction of A. So that is the meaning of AM being p-fold degenerate. So B on one of them will not be an eigenfunction of B. So that's the whole point. Don't say chi-m is an eigenfunction of B also. I am saying chi-m is an eigenfunction of A with AM, which is degenerate. So there will be another p number of chi-m. You call them chi-m1, chi-m2, or give some other number, UM, VM, WM, whatever you want to do. It is better to give an upper index chi-m1 and give C. So B chi-m is not necessarily an eigenfunction of this. But B chi-m, where will it take? It will be one of those P eigenfunctions or their linear combinations, because all of them are eigenfunctions of A with eigenvalue E. And linear vector space theory says that if B is in this space, taking it to some other function, we can always find such combinations in those P eigenfunctions that some linear combination will become an eigenfunction of B also. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. She says she understood it.
Yeah, good.
So there is another question.
Yeah.
When can an operator commuting with Hamiltonian need
Yeah.
not necessarily be a symmetry of the system?
Generally it is. Generally it is.
Okay.
It's always, I mean, it is always related to some symmetry of the problem. Sometimes it need not be geometrical symmetry. It need not always necessarily be geometry. There are sometimes some complicated symmetries called dynamical symmetries, etc. So operator commuting with some operator generally needs this thing. Or in fact, the other way is a more interesting thing. I think it's these kinds of uniqueness results are very difficult to say, you know, because what we can say, when there is a symmetry, you always find an operator. Now, is there an operator that commutes? Of course, I can give you trivial examples which will commute with that operator. Give me a h, I'll take h square, it will commute. So, you know, these uniqueness questions don't have much, don't have a clear answer. I'll say yes, trivially there could exist some operators which commute. But we have to see what is physically substantive. So it was the problem. You say, if there is a symmetry, will there be an operator? Then the answer is yes, there will be an operator that commutes. Okay, next question.
So the next question is, for
Yeah.
macroscopic objects, we can ignore their wave properties considering the very small de Broglie wavelengths.
Yes.
How is this interpretation insufficient and we need decoherence theory?
No, very good. That is a very standard, you know, very simple-minded interpretation, and it gives you a feeling that macroscopic objects will never satisfy. We have nothing to do with QFD. In fact, that point was there in the beginning, but now it has been long proved that there exists macroscopic level things which actually show quantum mechanical properties. Even now, without decoherence or anything. After all, there are macroscopic quantum effects like superconductors, etc., which are not micro objects, but they show quantum correlations, etc. So this is called macroscopic quantum mechanics. It already exists, although we are not going into it. A many body system sometimes that can have very long quantum correlations, and there are examples. I think the important examples are superfluids and superconductors. They are not one particle system. They are many particle system, microscope system, but some of their properties cannot be explained unless you go to quantum mechanics. So by the student, the fact that wavelength is small, and therefore that's definitely a correct thing. Generally that is true, but there are exceptions to this, or because of very subtle reasons that macroscopic quantum mechanical results exist even in the current theory without measurement problems, etc. But what we were talking of is just a simple query by any student. So why can't I get superpositions? I mean, what is the problem? Why can't I superpositions of quantum mechanics? And because if it consisting of atoms, large number of atoms, it should show quantum. In principle, it should show. You have to show me that they decohere, and they do actually because of environmental interaction. Yeah.
So there is
Yeah.
So there is one more question.
Yeah.
Is the set of possible eigenvalues for a measurement A a property of the operator or the wave function being operated on?
Is the set of
Is the
what?
set of possible eigenvalues for a measurement A a property of the operator or the wave function being operated on?
What do you think? What is, I say, interesting question. What do you think? What does somebody else think? Are the eigenvalues property of the operator or the wave function that one is talking about? Let me get the answer from some. It's a crucial point to understand. I hope it's clear.
Sir,
Yeah?
Sir, the answers are almost like 50-50. Some people say wave function and some people say operator and some say both.
No. The answer is eigenspectrum is a property of that particular operator. How can it be a property of wave function? Wave function is arbitrary. Anything, any wave function you can like. What it will have, it has nothing to do with the eigenvalues of the operator. The eigenvalues of the operator are obtained from the specific solutions A, E equal to lambda E. But psi need not be one of those E's. We have said so many times. What then is the meaning of completeness? If psi were to determine eigenvalues, then what is the whole thing would not, you just go through the things again. These are very legitimate. I must say, I welcome all these queries. They will help you resolve some of the usual pitfalls, because these pitfalls are important to clarify. Wave function, arbitrary wave function, has nothing to do with eigenvalues of anybody, any operator. Eigenvalues are a property of A. Why are they properties of A only? Because you solve A, E equal to lambda E. Now, where is the wave function here? That's why I said in the postulate 3, before you talk of psi, go and tell the person, you get me the eigenvalue spectrum and eigenvalue. Before even you start talking about what does psi contain, etc., what is the probabilistic information. So why did I say that you first ask the person to get the eigenspectrum and eigenspectrum and the corresponding eigen. So eigenspectrum and the corresponding eigenfunctions are the property of that particular operator, not any psi. Psi will need to be expanded. If you want measurement of A, psi will need to be expanded in terms of this complete set that you obtain elsewhere, or they may be listed in a table or at the end of the book. It has nothing to do with your wave function. So please clarify this point complete. It's a very good query that has been asked, and I hope, is it clear to the student who asked it? I mean, is she okay with it?
Okay, this is Anvesh. I mean, just interrupting a bit.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, almost all the students had written wave function, and I think the reason is, I think they're confusing between the eigenvalue and the measured value in a given state. That is the, I think, point that is missing here.
No, eigenvalues are the only possible eigenvalues of an operator A are the only possible values of measurement, no matter which wave function, on which wave function you are measuring. So that's the point. The wave function doesn't matter. The eigenvalues are only possible result measurement, because the eigenvalues correspond to the operator A, not on psi. But that's the wave function collapse. That's the problem, that the wave function size, anything, any square integral function, you're operating it on psi. It has nothing to do with psi, which eigenvalues will, which measured values will come. It has absolutely nothing to do. So postulate 2 has nothing to do with psi. But then where does psi come in the picture? Psi comes in the picture about psi is related to Cn. Please understand, Cn. En has nothing to do with psi. En has to do with A. You must clarify, even if I lose a lecture. This is very, very important. Just see this. An, you are saying An has to do, no, An has to do only with A. And if you are making measurement, if you are doing theory, better get this separately without even talking about psi. Now I have made measurement on psi. When I measure amount of psi, Cn is the probability, or mod square is the probability that psi will be in one of these states. And one of these states has this property that it gives you An. So if it is in En, it will give you An as the measurement. So then what is the role of psi? Role of psi is here. Cn is determined entirely by psi and of course by En. So is that clear? So psi comes into the picture. I mean, with a different psi, there will be different Cn, not different En. En are already determined for it. If you have fixed the measurement A, where I am going to measure momentum or whatever observable I want to measure, momentum, energy, whatever. So I have done this problem. Now you give me one wave function. What will be different from one wave function to another? Not En, not An, Cn. Different wave functions will have different probability distributions for that given observable A that you are trying to measure. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. She says yes.
Yes.
So probably we
So,
can.
yeah, I think so. Very good that, I mean, this is the fundamental thing. You have to just keep on reflecting on it. What is it? This. Any confusion, you must clarify, because this is the crux of quantum mechanics. Okay. So now, if you allow me, I'll go ahead now with.
So there are a few other questions in YouTube, but probably we can
But
answer them.
I think we have
Yeah.
to. That I'll definitely answer. Please answer very. You are. I must say that you are asking excellent questions. Some of them I have to make me think a lot, and it is a great pleasure to answer those questions. But please give me time, because it's a very packed thing, and I'm not abundant with time and energy as this. So just give me time, and I'll answer those questions. Just give me a days. Maybe it will get late. I mean, this answers to lecture 7 may come a couple of days later, but they will definitely be answered. Unless they are repetitive, then we'll refer. We'll not this thing. Yeah. So now let me go to the next thing. Shall I go to the next one? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sure.
I don't regret at all that we spent a lot of time on 7, which was the crux of the whole matter. And now I come to this, and now I have very little time. So yeah, it will be 20-25 minutes. And this is, I don't regret small, because it's just a mathematics lecture and it hardly needs teaching. It is all there in this lecture slide. You please go through it. Even I rushed through it. You are unlikely to, absorb everything so fast, but don't worry at all. It's a very simple topic. You just look at it. It's just mathematics. There is no physics in it. But the motivation of this is, just listen to the motivation. The motivation of vector space theory is the following. See, we know all of us know ordinary three-dimensional vectors. And here in quantum mechanics, we are talking of functions. So what is the connection? Three-dimensional vectors are something different we learn from school days, and suddenly these functions and operators and eigenfunctions, and what is the connection? So that is where this lecture will help you understand the connection. Now, mathematicians, their whole idea is to see unifying structure among things which look separate. I mean, to lay people like physicists, I mean, well, those two are different things. But the greatness of mathematics is they see the structural properties to be same. And then why is it useful? It's a unification. They build up an abstract structure whose one example will be three-dimensional vector, whose another example will be the functions that we are talking. What a wonderful thing, that things which looked so different on the face of it to a layperson, mathematician sees them same. And remember, that's always the mark of deeper thinking. When things look separate to a layperson, they are aspects of the same thing. When that happens, then you can say you are going deeper into whatever issue you're talking about. So that's the beauty of mathematics, and we'll just rush through it. To understand the particular steps, you need time. But I'm going to do various things: linear independence of vectors, dimension and basis, inner product, orthonormal basis. All these words you have seen. Eigenfunctions, only matrix representation will be something new, and how they transform. It's a very long topic, and please don't worry about it, because the same thing I'm going to use with Dirac notation in the next lecture. Lecture 9 will be a repetition of this, but in a new quantum mechanical notation, Dirac notation. So don't worry that you have not understand. And during this weekend, this slide, these lectures will be released. So I urge you to go through it very, very relaxedly and properly, and you'll understand everything. So let's begin. Linear vector space and field. Field, don't worry, field means as far as real or complex numbers, that's all. And these are elements. So I have put arrow. I am not meaning it to be three-dimensional vectors. And this vector does not mean three-dimensional vector. A function is also vector according to this in quotes. If you want to write it in quotes, you can write vector quotes, can be functions also. So these are abstract vectors, and their additions and scalar multiplications are scalar multiplication means some number times this, and addition means this. And they are closed. Closed means if you add or you multiply by a number, they remain in the same set. So that is what mathematicians call the set is closed under these two operations. That's their language. We can easily see keep two examples in mind only. Although in this lecture I have given some other examples. What are the two examples? Three-dimensional vectors and functions. Three-dimensional vectors, we have all learned in our higher secondary how to do the parallelogram law, and that becomes another vector. But what's the big deal? Functions also, when they add, they become another function. So a square integrable function, you add another square integrable, it will become square integral. It can be proved. So existence of a null vector. Don't get intimidated by this mathematical language. It's all very simple. Zero vector means zero. Function equal to zero means there is an additive inverse, commutativity of addition, all this typical language that in mathematics is extremely important because they are talking of abstract structure, but they're easily satisfied by our examples. So these are just for completeness I have written. Vectors are abstract, they can be familiar three-dimensional wave function, they can be metrized, but don't worry about this. This example, don't worry about. Field again in abstract, but for us it will be just numbers, complex numbers. Examples, three vectors. There are polynomials, but I will go into it. I need only this and this. No, sorry, 1 and 3. Three vectors, square integral function. Don't worry about other examples, otherwise it will confuse you. What are independent vectors? We have talked, we know what independent vectors in ordinary three-dimensional vectors are concerned. They should not be along the same line. So then they are independent vectors. And how many vectors will be needed, that also we know. Dimension. Dimension means maximum number of linearly independent vectors. How many are needed for three-dimensional vector space? Please tell me. Write in the chat how many are needed. For three-dimensional vectors, the very world is giving you the answer.
Yes.
How many linearly independent?
Sir, all of them are saying 3.
And how many will be needed for functions? Give me the answer. How many will be needed for functions? Linearly independent functions. How many?
So they are saying 3, and some say infinite.
Three functions. Your mathematical intuition should tell you that in terms of three functions alone, can I expand any arbitrary function? Obviously I will need an infinite set of functions, like Fourier series is infinite in number. So the function space is infinite dimension. And the vectors that we talk about, they are three-dimensional vectors. So there is a huge difference in dimension, but the structure is similar. So any linearly independent vectors are this. And so examples, vectors in a plane, two-dimensional, vectors in a space, this. Forget about polynomial. Space of a square integrable functions, infinite dimension. And we are going to take care, because we are not mathematicians, we are going to take over the results from finite dimensional and just change it. It's a huge thing in mathematics to go from finite to infinite. Many subtleties come, but which we will not get into. So mathematical results, I have told you, in the infinite dimensional space, eigenfunctions of a Hermitian object constitute the basis. So Once a basis is chosen, you have done this. Now in mathematics, there are numerous issues of whether the series converges in what manner, etc. We just don't worry about it. I have written those words have been written just for completeness. So now important notion is inner product, what we call scalar product, inner product. Now please remember this A and B are abstract. Do not think you should write AB sine theta. That is inner product for those three-dimensional vectors. But without saying what, inner product have these very important properties. That this is this, and from these properties, you can even get this. This is very important because we are in complex space. AB is BA star. That is the way it's defined. And there's another way of looking at inner product, but today I will not get into it. I will go into this in Dirac notation. So forget about the linear functional for the time being. Then the most important thing is mathematicians prove this property without for Cauchy inequality, without saying what those vectors are, except that they should form a vector space. So that's the beauty of mathematics. They are proving things independent of their examples. So this is for those abstract vectors with the properties of inner product defined. One can go through this proof. If you please go through yourself, you will be able to get this property. Now, how is it useful to us? For ordinary, normal, I mean, three-dimensional space vectors that we are familiar, this property is obviously true because we define it this way. But the great thing is this property is true. This for polynomials, forget about it. This property is true for our functions also. Now, this is really fascinating. Just see, AB for three-dimensional vectors, this property is satisfied, and we see, oh, it's so simple. A square, B square, cos square theta is obviously less than A square, B square, or at most equal to if theta is 0. So simple. But the same structure gives you this property, which is not so simple. Psi1 star psi2 mod square is less than this. So for a mathematician, and now for us also, these two properties are actually the same structural property of the abstract vectors. These are just examples of those vectors. When it comes to examples, one may be very easy to understand because we have defined it AB cos theta. There is no cos theta, etc. For abstract vectors. There is no meaning of cos theta in abstract vectors, but there is a geometrical meaning for three-dimensional vectors. So that's the greatness of mathematics, that same property to a lay person will say this is one thing, this is another. Actually, are the same. Absolutely different looking properties are actually same in a deeper sense. What deeper sense? Because these are examples of those abstract vectors, and the abstract vectors follow this property that I showed you earlier, this property. So just AB inner product for ordinary case is AB cos theta, and for inner product for psi1 psi2 is psi1 star psi2. Yeah, this I should have emphasized. Inner product of psi1 psi2 is defined to be this. Is it all right? Yes, it will satisfy all the properties that mathematicians have given for inner product. Take its complex conjugate, it will be complex conjugate of the other. So you should check all those things. And so yeah, so I told you that two vectors are orthogonal if AB is 0. So we call it perpendicular. So this is general, abstract. And two vectors are orthogonal, three-dimensional, they are orthogonal in the perpendicular sense. And square integrable, there is no meaning of perpendicular in a geometrical sense. But the inner product was defined this way. So this is the meaning of orthogonality. We have already used this. I have already told you the meaning of orthogonality in function space. Now you see today that what I call orthogonality and what three-dimensional vectors are called orthogonality, they are just examples of inner product being 0 in the abstract vector space. So that's the, and then the standard thing, they form a basis. You can expand, you can invert for orthogonal basis, and if they are normalized, then you can invert, etc., etc. All the standard stuff is being written here for completeness. You know already what it is. Then another standard thing is that sometimes the linearly independent vectors are not orthogonal. When did we, if these vectors are functions, when did we come across this situation? Please tell in the chat, when did we come across this situation? That it may not be orthogonal or orthonormal. Now regard these as this is mathematicians talking about abstract vectors. I say I will go to the concrete situation of this vector being functions. So when did we get the situation that they may not be independent? They are linearly independent, but not orthogonal. When did we get this situation?
So someone says different eigenfunctions of single eigenvalue
Great, great.
or degeneracy, degenerate eigenfunctions.
Absolutely, excellent. So you're all with me here. You're all following it very, very well. So that's exactly what we were talking about. That multiple eigenfunctions, degenerate eigen for a common eigenvalue need not be orthogonal. They are independent. Remember, they are linearly independent. That is why it's called degenerate situation. They are linearly independent, but not orthogonal. The same thing can happen in general, even A2, etc. So, and in abstract vector space theory or itself, it is easy to see how to make them orthogonal. Just start with first vector. Second vector will be a linear, take E1 plus A2. You have been given these to be independent. So I take now independent combinations of these. And now I demand that E2 is orthogonal to E1. So if I demand, I get alpha. So I have constructed E. Similarly, if E3, you take E1, E2. These are undetermined constant. There will be two equations, E3 even. Very, very simple, I think, for people of your, having achieved much already, these steps are extremely easy. And you can determine alpha, beta. And this is called Schmidt's orthogonality precision. This is what I meant by saying that, yeah, if they are linearly independent, you can always make them orthonormal. Even if they are not to start with, you can make them orthogonal. This is what I have been saying, and now this is a proof of that. Okay, so this is the way. So ordinary three-dimensional vector basis is this, the so-called I, J, K unit vector we are following. Wave mechanical infinite dimensional space, it's sometimes you will see in books, this is called in Hilbert space. And don't worry about those words. Inner product of two functions is this. Orthonormal basis functions are these. So we have all done this so many times already in the lectures. Now we are viewing it as functions are vectors, examples of vectors in infinite dimensional vector space. Vectors in quotes do not always associate vector or vector space with the ordinary geometrical vector. Function is also a vector. And if you don't like to use the same, just write vector in quotes, because this theory is called vector space theory. So this is what is this? This is orthogonality and orthonormal. Because once the norm is one, then that is called normalized vector. Now the only caution I said, we'll take without much thinking, go to the infinite case. One little caution in physics, that in finite dimension, every linearly independent n number of vectors constitute a base. But in infinite dimension, every linearly independent finite set may not be enough. Can you give me an example that it is infinite in number and still it is not enough to form a basis? That is, you can't expand every function. Can you give me an example? Give me an example where they are infinite in number and yet you can't expand every some infinite set of functions. Yeah.
Sir, no answer so far.
Yeah, for example, sine and x in Fourier series.
Okay, someone says delta function, and someone says set of all polynomials.
Set of all polynomials are not enough because function can be beyond polynomials. So it will be series. Polynomials and something. Set of all polynomials may be fine for polynomial vector space, but we are talking of quantum mechanical vector space of square integrable function. The simple answer is Fourier sine series and cos. Both sine and cos are needed. Or both, I mean, if you take infinite number of even functions, they will not be enough to expand any function. You will need both even and odd functions. So these are the examples that just being infinite is not enough. It is essential, but not enough. Finite number will never do for quantum mechanical vector space. But just because something is infinite is not enough. That is why I said that something is enough requires mathematical mathematics, and it needs proper rigorous mathematical proofs. But it's easy to conceive of examples which are infinite in number and yet not complete. The set of sine functions, the set of cosine functions in Fourier series. They each one of them will not be complete, but together every function can be expanded. So that is the reason we put e to the power ikx, because e to the power ikx contains both cos as well as sine. And it can be inverted, etc. And I think we have done so many times, except instead of f, we had to put psi. So today we are doing mathematical things. So we are psi. Operators are linear. You all know this. Antilinear, if you have this star, and antilinear operator come in a very special context. We are not going to do. Important, forget about this. I mean, there are some mathematical issues where they can be defined. Two operators equal, you all know. Sum means this, product means obvious things, but mathematicians, remember, have to give these proper definitions. Don't ever say that it's obvious. It may be obvious to you because we are talking of certain examples, but they are doing structure without any particular example. So for them, everything has to be properly defined. Once you define it consistently, then there is no. So these are the meanings of that definition. Three-dimensional vector example of an operator is rotation. It's linear. You take a thing and rotate. That rotation is an operation. It will be linear. Operator in quantum space, we already seen these are linear operators. So inverse operators, obvious meanings. Don't get into this left inverse, right inverse. This only for completeness. You just stick to this. This is the inverse. And property of AB inverse is B inverse inverse. You should be just alert to some of these properties. AB inverse is not B inverse. How to prove it? Just multiply by AB. So A inverse will give you 1, and then you will be left with B inverse B. That will be also 1. So that is how to prove that B inverse A inverse. Adjoint. This is now I am putting it. Just see. I am putting it in the new language. The adjoint or Hermitian conjugate. Now, can you see it is the same thing that I told you earlier? Very easy to see, because in quantum mechanics, A is function, B is another function. So psi1, psi2. And what is the inner product of in quantum mechanics? Supposing it is psi1, supposing this is psi2. Psi2 star A dagger psi1 dx. That's the meaning of this notation. This notation is abstract notation, inner product of any two abstract vectors. And here there is an abstract operator. When we go to example, what will happen? A will become psi2, B is psi1, and what is the inner product defined? The left hand side is complex conjugate. So it is psi2 star A dagger psi1 dx. And that is here psi1. I mean, so A into psi2 star and psi1. You just check that this is the same thing that I said. And properties of dagger operation, please remember this, AB dagger, etc. This again is something like this. It's not AB dagger, is not A dagger, B dagger. AB dagger is B dagger. Please try to prove these properties yourself using these very, very simple properties to prove. And Hermitian or conjugate as before, if the dagger is the same as the operator, then it's Hermitian. And another proper operator we define is unitary, where the dagger is U inverse. So today we have defined another kind of operator, unitary. It plays a great role. The reason is unitary operators keep the inner product unchanged. Just see, you take A dash equal to UA, B dash is equal to UB. Now find out inner product. I'm not talking of any example. It's all abstract practice. True for any example. A dash is UA, this thing. What is the definition of dagger? Put dagger here. And this, what is the property of UU dagger? It's 1. So A dash B dash is equal to 1. So a unitary operator keeps inner product unchanged. In particular, an orthonormal basis remains orthonormal. Very, very important point. Because what is the orthonormal basis is defined by an inner product, that it should be Kronecker delta Mn. It remains the same even if you operate each basis vector by a unitary operator. So that this is very important, as many people say, quantum mathematics is nothing but the interplay of Hermitian and unitary operators. So both operators you should know very, very well. And then eigenfunctions, I need to go into this. This has been written for containers. You know what one means by this. This is written only in abstract notation. That is the only thing. All these steps you have seen earlier, there the functions, here today we are writing in abstract vectors without examples. In example, ENS will be functions, some functions of this. So I've used the same language, same notation. So in fact, it will be obvious. But do not think I'm talking of only ENS. It could be some other example, some only function. But for our quantum mechanical vector space, yeah, it's a function, ENSR. So, and these properties, I've read so many times about these properties. And yeah, today I was going to give proof of this, but I think it's time. So let's go. I think the proof is also very simple. Sorry, I'm hurrying, but just see, look at the proof, because I don't think I will spend time on these small matters later. So I'm going to prove to you what I have been claiming all the time, that lambdas are real and eigenfunctions with distinct values are this thing. It is no more than a 1-minute proof. Take AEN, lambda en, AEN this. And this proof is general for abstract vector space theory. Okay, no problem. Take inner product of this. So you will get lambda n. Lambda n is a number you come to. Take inner product. Take inner product of En for the second equation. So no great thing. I mean, this is En, this is En. Okay. Then complex conjugation of use of A and A dagger. So you complex conjugate A, En, En, and use of A equal to A dagger. So if you complex conjugate, you will get A dagger, but then put A dagger equal to E. So you will get this step. And this complex conjugation, what you give? You see, this is the step. Complex conjugation will be A is the same thing as AEN here, and you complex conjugate. For Hermitian operator, this is the same thing as A here. So simple. En, A, En is the same thing as A just here. A, En, En. So if you complex conjugate that AEN star, you become lambda m star. And what is the complex conjugation of this? AB is BA star. So you get this EM. Or now what does this mean? Just change the order. AEN is lambda m star. So now look at these two equations. This by manipulations, I have got two equations here. The manipulation is simply complex conjugation and use of hermiticity property. Just look at this equation. They are in the same form. Subtract. So left hand side is the same. They will give you 0, and you get lambda n minus lambda m star. So you get this, because the left hand sides were the same. You get this. Now you take m equal to n. because that was true for anything. Put m equal to n. So then you get em lambda m star minus lambda. Just put n equal to m. But now this is non-zero. Remember, norm is always non-zero of any, otherwise it is a null vector. But for any vector which is not a null vector, norm is 0. So we are talking of wave function. Wave functions are not 0 in our case, but for any null vector in general, this is non-zero. So what does this imply? Lambda m star. So that's the proof that eigenvalues are real. Completely correct proof for abstract vector space. For abstract vector space. Put lambda m star equal to lambda m, and we get back into this equation. So now that we have proved it real, why put star? When you get back to this. So you see, this equation is giving you both the results. By putting n equal to m, it is giving you real, and then you go back, put lambda m, and now say m is not n. How wonderful. I mean, same equation. First you put m equal to n because it's true for any mm. Now you take lambda n. So if it is not n, then this has to be 0. So that's the proof for eigenvector for distinct eigenvalues. So that's what I meant by 2-minute proof. Completely correct and easy for any vector space. And I had already told you that you have to throw your hands off when it comes to the property 3 and go to mathematicians to prove. The first 2 properties are very easy. The last property is hard. That it can, yeah. Now, one more thing, a few more points, and I'll stop. Just the most important point, and I will not rush through it. I will probably again revise from this point onwards. Up to this point, you please revise your set. I will not revise next time, but this I'll rush through and then come back to it again. So pick up as many things as you can. The point is, now what is this business of matrices? Where are the matrices? There is a matrix coming in vector space theory. It comes in a very straightforward way. This is an abstract vector. This is some abstract basis. Just expand, because the basis means it. You can expand. These numbers are there. How many numbers will there for n dimensional? N numbers. How many numbers will be there for 3-dimensional vectors? 3 numbers. How many will be there for infinite dimension? Infinite number. And whatever is the dimension, they will define a column matrix. You can put them in a, one after another. They define a column. So this Vi is Vi1. So, 1 means column is just 1, and this is the row index, that's the meaning of column. Column average is this. And orthonormal basis, of course, we all know this. So you know what this Vi is. It is as simple as this. We call Vi1, Vi matrix, this matrix, column matrix, as the matrix representation of vector V with respect to Vi. Note the words, matrix representation or column matrix representation of the abstract vector V with respect to the abstract basis C. So these numbers are not abstract, they are ordinary numbers, complex numbers in general. So this is the meaning, this is how, such a simple way to obtain the matrix representation. An operator, very similar. An operator AEI takes it to some other vector, but the E's form a basis so that some other vector can be written in terms of the old. I cannot put, again, dummy, I will not repeat this. You will get a sense as you practice. I can't put AI here because it will have to be AJ. Here I is a particular, maybe 1, 2, 3. And then it's a summation. I can't use the same index here. It has to be J. And this index comes here. And a little bit of an invert, it is AJI, not AIJ. That is by convention, and that is very important that you put JI here. So there will be 2 numbers. Why are there 2 numbers, 2 indices? One specifies which vector is being operated on, The other specifies the which basis vector is being, it's a sum over J. So this is a square matrix. This defines a square matrix. You take it onto this side, you will find, but that is true only for orthonormal basis. You can invert for orthonormal basis. Things are very easily invertible. So you get this. And finally, note the obvious, but people forget sometimes. The most obvious point that operators are something given to you, operator, and these vectors are, some vector has been given to you, this particular operator. But these numbers depend on which basis you have chosen. If you choose some other basis, these numbers are going to be different. Same vector. It's exactly like a three-dimensional vector. If you choose one axis, you get ax, ay, az. If you choose some rotated axis, you will get a prime x, a prime y, az. The vector remains the same. Because you chose a different basis, you got the different projections, numbers. Exactly the same point here. The matrix representation of a state or vector, an obvious but extremely significant statement. There's nothing to explain, it's obvious. If I choose EI instead of say FI, so are these numbers going to be the same? No, obviously not. There'll be some other numbers. Okay. And we can see that, this abstract operator equation, you go to a basis and it becomes a corresponding matrix equation. Please do this proof yourself. I don't have time. Very simple proof. And this is one of the reasons why, even if you don't understand all these vector space theories very well, you see, you'll never, all that say, I don't care about this. There's an operator equation. Well, it means the matrix equation will be the matrix of A, the column of C, the column of D with respect to the same basis. Remember, it has to be with respect to C. So there is a complete matrix equivalent of the abstract part. So this is the reason when in practice you have forgotten these various things and don't have to worry much. The operator equations have exact counterparts in matrix equations. So similarly, ABC, with respect to a given basis, this equality will be the same as the corresponding matrix. That's the beauty and the simplicity of this whole game, that things are very, very natural. And for all this to have happened, AB equal to C is this. Please remember the definition of matrix. The definition of this, it is this. AJI is inner product of EJ, AI. This again is very easy to remember. JI, JAI. So all it is really very, very simple and absolutely elegant. Operator equation, I once promised you that dagger in operator means dagger of a matrix. This is the proof. Please do it yourself. Take one particular basis, take the matrix of B, take the matrix of A. Basis should be fixed, remember. And then use the Hermitian property of operator. And you get Bij is the same thing as Aj star. That means in matrix equivalent, it's the same old dagger which everybody knows, complex conjugate in this. So complex conjugate transpose is very much sensible here, but there is no meaning of complex conjugate in transpose here. Here you have to take these operators, their matrix elements. Then you get the corresponding matrices are Hermitian conjugate in the standard sense. And transformation theory is what happens, how these matrices transform. I told you the matrices depend on the basis. Then the natural question is, if I change the basis, what happens? If I change the basis, what happens? So that is called Dirac's not Dirac for quantum mechanics, a transformation theory in vector space, that how do these matrices transform? Please do them yourself. You can easily do. We have already seen that the two bases, the inner products remain the same. So if I take a unitary operator, if it is orthonormal, it remains orthonormal. And then I can define, just see this. V is this, V dash I in different basis. and E dash I is defined in terms of by a unitary matrix. Just put it together, you get this transformations. So V was the transformation of the V was the representation of the same column in E basis. V dash is the representation of the same column in a new basis. The two columns are related by the unitary matrix that changes one basis to another. And if it is orthonormal, then it is unitary, etc. So you get, so these are the equation. Exactly the same thing for matrix. This proof is maybe a little longer. This is the matrix with respect to E dash basis. This is the matrix with respect to E basis. U is the thing that is transforming the basis. You have this relation for orthonormal. Very, very simple and extremely, however, extremely important for this thing. So I think here I will stop. I won't test your patience further than this. There are some other additional points which are a bit more important. So I should not rush this. Up to this point, please do this yourself. The matrices, please do it yourself. I'll go to the matrix part, but before that, I will not revise. The matrix representation of of states and operators, I will do again next time before I move to Dirac notation of lecture 9. So enjoy this weekend and have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a beautiful lecture, and we have some more questions in the YouTube.
Yeah,
but probably
it's my duty to inform you about the references. So all the slides were taken from Amol Bile, and actually I had prepared the lecture, which I could not give last time. And I should tell you the reference. This is an extremely well-written book, Linear Algebra by Gelfand. Very, very good book for finite dimensional space. Infinite dimensional space, the closest, otherwise it's too hard a subject for physicists. But this book does it as rigorously as physicists can digest. So infinite dimension. Finite dimension is a rather simple subject, and it's all given in book. And Griffiths also talk about it. Again, I thank my friends, Dalvi and Majumdar, for their help. And I go back to home. And yeah, if you have some fleeting questions at the end.
I think since it's already 12:30, I suggest that we close now, and you can perhaps answer the questions later.
So please do ask questions. Do not worry. I will repeat some part of it. The initial rather simple part, please do it yourself. From matrix representation onwards, I will repeat it, and then I will go to Dirac notation. On Monday, we have 2 lectures, and the lecture 10, linear harmonic oscillator, is probably a small, simpler lecture. So we will be able to finish on Monday everything that we intend to finish. I mean, and then of course, remaining thing in lectures 11 and 12. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
You can stop the streaming, please.
Yeah. Should I leave now?